sometimes you don't know what to ask. So if you are feeling any type of negative emotion, anger, anxiety, all of the things on one umbrella, ask yourself, what is frustrating me the most? And when you know what's frustrating you the most, you'll know exactly who to ask and what to ask.
Mm.
And sometimes we just need that clarity and that self-care of what's really frustrating me the most. Do I feel invisible? Do I feel not valued? Whatever it is, find that answer. You'll know what to ask and who to ask. And here's a framework that you can do it.
Welcome to the People Powered Solutions podcast. In this show, you'll gain expert advice and tips on building a thriving workplace culture with happy employees. I'm your host, Lorianne Duguay, and I'm thrilled to be spending this time with you today. Hello, and welcome, listeners, to another episode of People Powered Solutions podcast. We all know that on a daily basis, we are asked to communicate on the regular. We as leaders have to have some more difficult conversations. We spend our days perhaps in meetings having to communicate and interpret messages from other people. Well, today's episode is dedicated to providing you some actionable strategies to help you be that much more effective and that much more efficient in your communications. Today, folks, we welcome Carole Stizza. Welcome, Carole.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. And I always mention that I'm not the biggest fan of having to read this awkward bio at the beginning while my guest is kind of sitting there just waiting for me to be done and waiting for their cue. So instead, I much prefer that the guest introduce themselves. So Carole, how about you give our audience a bit of a better idea of how Carole got to doing what Carole does?
Well, that could be a really long or short story, depending on which approach we take. So I'll
We
try to
usually
make
aim for
it.
about 30 minutes, so
Oh my goodness.
I'll let you tailor it accordingly, not for the bio, for the episode
That's
itself.
right, right. Um, just for people to know enough to get to a gist, I am still married, but we were in the military, Air Force for 26 years, and I worked all over the United States getting to see military and corporate leadership, some at their finest, some at not so much their finest. And it occurred to me at one point when I was asked to share why I thought I deserved a promotion, a different job. And I realized I didn't really know how to speak my value. And
Hmm.
that's when I started investigating, well, how do we find that out? And that took me on a brilliant journey. So all of my background career now falls underneath the brilliant umbrella of human resources. I'm a strategic senior HR professionals. I moved over to executive coaching because most of the time I was asked to deal with leaders who might be the person who's causing the problems. And I found that that was a really great place for me to play because that's where the best effective solutions were going to stem from for the people that was asked to help and support. So it's been a wonderful, wonderful journey. We are now living in Colorado. We moved during COVID. We love the mountains, and I still get to work with wicked smart people and just handling the challenges. And I think the thing that I would love for your audience to know is it doesn't matter the title. We all have a mess. We all have a mess.
I'll have a mess. I love it.
And and when you see your boss that's looking amazing, they still have a mess somewhere.
There's a mess.
It's
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I love that you work with leaders because at the end of the day, I've noticed two things, and you can chime in whether or not you've noticed the same. A lot of the organizational issues that companies regularly contend with their people are in fact rooted in the leadership team and the fact that the leadership team haven't been equipped or set up for success when it comes to leading people. Because although you might be the most advanced technical person and or where I've seen another trend, you've been around the longest, so of course you're supposed to be the one who's promoted into a leadership role, it doesn't necessarily translate or correlate to you being the most well-equipped people manager, right? So to be able to equip, and once you start to work with the leadership, the ripple effect on the overall organization and on the team members can be absolutely game changing. Have you, the second thing that I was mentioning is that often the leaders will come to us saying that their team members are all the problems. And not until do we do a bit of digging and a bit of holding up a mirror for them, they recognize that they, in fact, as a leader, have had a hand in that outcome.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there is a strong connection. Any behavior that you allow to fester on your team is at least contributed because you let it fester.
Absolutely.
So you either have to solve it, you created it and you need to solve it, or you have to stop it and solve it. I do love working with leaders who lead people because that's when the leader will actually do the work. When they can see the results in the people they're trying to lead, they will finally go, okay, fine, let's work. Yeah. Okay, good, good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It also speaks to just mindset and the importance of mindset. I also do some executive coaching. And of course, if it's prescribed to them,
yeah,
feel like just the entire potential of growth and development is stagnated or stifled. While if they come to you because they realize and recognize that they can't, if they always do what they've always done, and they'll always get what they always got. Wow, that was a mouthful. But they realize that they need to change, they need to pivot, they need to adapt, and come to you for that guidance, right?
right. And the fastest way to change a mindset from punitive, I have to do this or I lose my job, is they're investing in you because you're worth keeping. So if you're worth keeping, how do we let them know you want it?
Yeah.
You step into coaching. Let's do this. And we have to reframe a lot of things in our life. But the moment I can reframe from it's a punishment to a gift, that often is all it takes to get them to step in.
Okay. I love that. And I love it for the point you're making, but I feel like it translates so many other places. If we can always reframe it's a punishment away from it's a punishment, or it's, get away from that victim mode and think about how is this a gift?
Why would
Or
they spend the money on you
it is a
if
gift.
you,
Yeah.
yeah. Why would they spend the money to pull me in if you weren't worth it?
I
So
love it.
let's grow together.
Let's grow together.
Let's grow together.
I love it. One of the things that we were chatting about right before we pressed record, and I feel like every conversation I've had with a guest before where we just get to know each other a bit at the onset of that meeting or this call, then I suddenly press record because I feel like we should have pressed record from the get-go. But you talked about, you said something about having a framework that you've come up with to help people ask for what they want. So how about we dive a bit deeper into that, maybe a bit of context of how that framework came about, who it's meant to help, in which situations, and tell us a bit more about the framework itself.
Happy to. So when I talked about not knowing how to speak my value at work, defend why I was worthy of that position, I wanted to I started researching the place that everybody researches is feedback. Why wasn't I told how well I'm doing? Why wasn't I told? And I went on that journey. I really did. And so I jumped into Harvard research on why feedback is in the top 5 conflicting conversations at work for every organization. And they found, and I had been teaching people how to give better feedback. So I was really surprised when I didn't have feedback to offer, right? So this is like irony upon irony upon irony, right? And they found that teaching people how to give feedback failed 95% of the time. But if they could teach people how to ask for the feedback they really wanted, when they wanted it, and when they could need it, then they suddenly knew how to give it too. And I go, oh, okay, I'm onto something. The interesting thing is these brilliant Harvard researchers didn't take it to the next step of, well, what do we do?
Oh,
so that was my own journey. And so I started researching people who could grab your attention, professional speakers. How do they grab people's attention? How How does the brain work? What kind of information would the brain find useful? So what do you ask, right? How do you get perspective? How do you keep the conversation going if you want to learn more? How do you stop the conversation that you didn't ask to have? How do
Yeah.
you set the boundaries and take more control over getting the information you want? So then the next step was, what kind of information does the brain really want? Nobody gets up any day to go, you know what? I'm going to suck today. It's going to be epic.
It's
I'm
gonna
going
be
to
an
get
epic suck
fired.
day. That's it. It's a bad day.
Everybody's going to hate me. It's going to be brilliant. No, everybody gets up to be successful. Every single person. They may be doing it poorly. It may last 5 seconds, but every person wakes up. Today's a better day. So you have to keep that in mind. And so when I looked at neuroscience, our brains are looking for two pieces of information all the time, 24/7, 365. It is scanning for what am I doing right and where can I grow next? That's it. So think about social media. We scroll for all the things that we love. We delete, hide, get rid of things we don't. And then we go look for something to learn because it exposes us to more new people. And it's an infinity loop. So if that's what our brain wants, if that's what gets us jazzed, when it comes to work, what am I already doing right that you don't want me to change? And where can I grow next? Keeps people engaged and coming back to work every day. So these are not improvement feedback conversations. These are feed forward, they're growth conversations. So this framework came about years of doing research, and I use the word ask with an exclamation point. And I also like things that fit on one hand. So if you can assign the right context for the conversation, meaning, hey, can we chat about the project we did last month? Just set the context. That sets both people up for success in the conversation. You don't know if that other person was trying to figure out soccer carpool or when the plumber could show up. So you can't just ask them a blank question without preparing them. So assign the right context. S, specify the one thing you really want to know. For example, talking about the project we did last month, what was the one thing I did that you felt contributed the most? If you bring it down to most, the most important, the favorite, the number one, most meaningful, whatever it is, bring it to one thing, the other person's brain can easily answer. But if you say, can you tell me all the reasons that you liked working with me last month? You're going to miss the opportunity, right? To understand what really meant the most to them. Mm-hmm. And K was know that other people have perspectives from their position. Your direct reports can be different than your peer. Your peers can be different than your boss. So ask them, hey, share with me how you experienced me when I did that. Share with me. And then that exclamation point at the end was to really kind of keep the conversation going with what and how questions. So this was a funny story. I was reading the book, Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. Famous, he's now a famous podcaster, but before he was a podcaster, he was a FBI agent who specialized in hostage negotiations. And the reason I came upon his name is he went to the class of the Harvard researchers who did the research on feedback, and he stumped their negotiation students 100% of the time. How? By not asking why, like, why do you say that? Why do you think that? Why don't I know that? No. He asked, well, what and how questions. I'm happy to do that. What should I do first? I'd love to do that. How do you think I should take this? So if I were to add that to the end of this little framework, you assigned the right context, you specified one thing you wanted to ask, and you ask it. They see life differently through their eyes, so you ask them to share it. How can I use that same thing in the next project? What's another area of work I could actually be that productive in? You can use what and how questions to keep the conversation going. Mm-hmm. And the moment, and this is why this ASK exclamation point is helpful, it sets a boundary for you too. So let's say you say, tell me one thing I did really well. And you've got somebody who likes to give you the good and the bad. And they go, well, the one thing you did really was, but that one area, and you go, whoa, time. You have initiative. You ask the question, time. You are the receiver. The power is in the receiving, and the receiver can time out the conversation by
I like
saying, I only can handle one piece of information at a time. I asked for the one thing. Let me sit with that. Thanks for letting me know you've got somewhere for me to grow. I'll come back when I'm ready. Is that okay? And they'll go, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. The interesting thing about this little framework, it's serving you so well to gain information, but it also makes the other person feel really valued and heard.
And I imagine it also conveys a structure for them to then deliver parallel feedback to other people. Because one of the things that, and I, when I teach effective communications and feedback and just the power of, as a leader, of growing a culture that not only embraces feedback, but facilitates it and encourages it, it needs to be happening on the regular and flowing in all directions. But one of the biggest challenges is they won't provide that. They're okay with the positive feedback. That one's the easy one. But the more constructive feedback, they struggle with. Those more courageous conversations, they struggle with, but they struggle with it because they're not really sure how to navigate them. So I feel like that framework you've presented provides a really nice way to structure that conversation. But now I'd be interested to hear, you used a very positive, growth example. Now let's, for the benefit of our listeners, let's explore one of those typical conversations you have to have that are a bit more negative. How do you navigate those more constructive negative conversations using this framework? Do you have an example?
I do, because we all worry about other people's feelings and how they're going to take it. When you can use the same framework, hey, I'd like to talk to you about yesterday's meeting, right? There is a specific behavior I see you doing in the meetings. I'm not sure you're aware that you do this, or I don't think you're aware of the message it's sending. So I'd like to talk to you about growth in this area. Here's what I experienced. This is the K. Here's what I experienced. You're sighing a lot, which the message that sends me is you don't want to be there, or you're bored, or you're really trying to tell me something and I'm not reading it enough to know what you're trying to tell me. So what are you trying to tell me? How would you like for me to interpret your sign?
Mm.
So if I just use this and go specify one thing, let them see how I'm experiencing, but assume good intent, assume
Absolutely.
noble intent. Again, they didn't get up going, I'm going to piss my boss off today by signing in the meeting. Cannot wait. No, this is just assume noble intent first and give them the space to be noble. They
Mm.
can always choose not to be. Da-da.
Some of them will, yes.
Right, they will. But when you do these conversations, they can be very short, sweet, quick, because you can always end if they've said, I had no idea that you could hear me sighing. You're like, well, congratulations, you do not have a poker face. So I need you to really understand that sighing isn't going to work in the meetings anywhere. So I need this growth to happen between now and next week's meeting. Set a boundary. Here's what I
Yeah.
expect to see. But it's a kind growth conversation. Here's specifics. Here's what the message. I don't think you're doing it in malintent. Let's grow there.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that. And I'm a huge fan of acronyms too. So I'm loving the ask exclamation mark acronym, but relevant to what we're talking about. I usually talk about the SBI approach. So situation that I've observed, the behavior here's a situation, the behavior is the what I've observed, and the impact, right? Which is captured perfectly in this example you just said.
Yep.
And my other favorite thing is always API, assume positive intent. So you said at the beginning before we hopped on that we're clearly from, we're two
Yep.
sisters from different mothers. I agree. I am 100% on the same page as you with that. I like that. One of the elements I've never really heard about is how to stop the conversation when it's gone beyond where you're comfortable. And I think that's often a power that we forget.
Right. It's a power we didn't know to give ourselves permission to have. We
Mm.
do a lot of assumptions at work based on outdated thinking
Mm.
that, and it really does stem from being a student at school and having a teacher teach And no one tells us the moment we step into a job, they want us to start asking questions, meet them where they are, not be the recipient of everything learned. So we learn victimhood by positively learning in a structured education system.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't go, here's your diploma. Now stop doing all that and start doing all this. Right.
Right.
Nobody tells you. Even in college, you have the authority, the instructor who can fail you from getting that college degree. You've paid for it, right? It's a threat. So you go into school and the boss is the threat. It is a subconscious replication of what you just came out of. And so I'm in love with teaching people what permission to gather. You have permission to ask, what am I doing right and where can I grow next? All the time. All the time. So I'll give you an example of a past client. Well, when I offer this in public speaking, I call her Savannah. Savannah had just gotten word, it was on her phone that she was given somebody else's client, and she could have gone, sweet, I'm being seen, I'm all that. No, she felt she was taken advantage of. Somebody's dumping somebody else's work on her, and she is hot. She's telling me about, I'm like, okay. You need to have a conversation with your boss. So what do you want to know? She goes, I want to know why me? Why was I given this client? I go, okay, let's go ask that. And so I coached her on this framework. And so she did. She goes, hey, can I have a few minutes of your time? I'd like to talk about the new client you put on my plate. Assign the context, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this specify one thing of focus. She asked such a brilliant question. Could you share with me what was the deciding factor that made me the number one choice for this client?
Love it.
And what she learned was that this client was an international client. And because of a meeting she had just attended, but she greeted them in the culture that they were coming from, nobody else had ever done that. They were willing to give the organization a bigger contract if she would be their contract lead. So just by asking this question, she wasn't just one of many, she had become the only. And now she knew this was a lot.
Mm.
And then the K, can you share with me how I'm going to handle this client with everything else I have on my plate? And the boss was like, absolutely. We already have people getting assigned. I'm already starting to distribute your other jobs because this is, and then she goes,
Priority one.
well, how do you see me being successful with this client? And the boss painted a picture. She left that quick conversation, knowing exactly what to do next, what the client wanted. And I told you in the beginning, I said, big information doesn't have to take big time. This was a quick conversation, and suddenly her life changed. She now knew exactly what she had done, what the client meant to the organization, and why she was picked.
Yeah.
So go after these conversations, but this acronym helps you kind of use it as a guideline to remind you what to include, right? And it's efficient, it's professional, it keeps you objective, it doesn't allow your heart and emotions to get in the way. Oh, what do I need to ask? But it does make you think better at work. What do I really want to know? How do I ask that in a way that my boss would want to hear me asking it?
Mm.
And asking those what and how questions allows you to kind of walk away knowing what to do next.
Love it. Love, love, love it. I think about so many of my clients that we've been in meetings, planning meetings, we're designing some initiative to support, either the leaders within the organization better manage their people or whatnot, or directly for the individuals, the team members. And I'll often hear comments like, well, I think I think they would probably want, and then I always land on, well, what's really this brilliant concept out in the real world? You can ask them what they want, because how much time are you going to be saving if you go directly to the source, and if you use this gold mine of data and information by going straight to the people who are going to be subjected to these processes, to these procedures. Ask them how they would need this to materialize, or how they would operationalize something like that. And
Right.
they will provide the insight you need to make sure that you're not having to redo and redo based on stuff that's coming out of the woodworks once you start to roll things out, right? So I love that you value and see the importance of just asking. How many
And this,
things, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was going to say, and this acronym can be used with clients and those people too, because you get specifics. You ask, what is the one thing you know will make this successful? Share with me how you'll use it. How will you know that it's successful? What's the first win you want to have with that? You can tear apart any project and get as specific as you need to and ask. And so I found this framework kind of use it, you can use it everywhere. I use it
Absolutely.
with my grandkids. I use it with my family. I use it with my friends. I have to walk the talk.
Yes.
It really does help people just kind of ask what they need and move on.
And
But
have an action from it, have something they can immediately do and grow from that conversation, right? And I think even some of the challenges that a lot of leaders are contending with right now, I would challenge you listeners to think about something that you may have grappled with this week. Is it actually rooted in your assumptions or perhaps in your not being too comfortable going directly to the source and trying to kind of go around it? Why not use this ask exclamation point framework to go directly to the source and get the insight you need to move forward?
people love the way this framework asks the questions of them. They love receiving it because you set them up for success by knowing the context. You help their brain tell you what's the most important. They get to share how life looks through their eyes. And then you're asking what and how questions. And they go, this was the most productive conversation I've had with anybody like in a week. Oh my
Yeah.
God, this is great. So,
Yeah.
but I think there's a hidden challenge in all of this is that we're conditioned to wait for good
Mm.
information and we wait for bad because we don't want the bad. So we create a cycle of waiting. And I'll share a personal example of why waiting is not good. And before I tell my story, I just want to plant a seed. We'll wait for a performance review. Oh, they never schedule them. They never have them. Why
Ask.
wait? We wait to hear what a client needs. Just to your point, we wait. Well, I'm no different. I'm human. And when things are scary, we choose to wait. And so I think in 2012, I had waited for a year to try and convince my doctor to take me more seriously when I felt that something wasn't quite right. And in the fall of 2012, I was sitting with and getting to meet my oncology team from the something not quite right turned into something very wrong because my doctor didn't believe me. And I had waited to take myself seriously enough to seek a second opinion. When it comes to medicine, if I'm not a doctor, I have a tendency to wait and defer to somebody else's expertise. But I had waited too long. And I'm a survivor, which is great. But at the
Yes.
same time, it really brought home if I had waited any longer, I wouldn't be here.
Mm.
So if you think about what waiting does, it raises your anxiety, it raises your fear factor, it gives you space to dream up everything that probably will never happen in the world, but you are convinced it will. And we create our own hell by waiting. So I'm not telling everybody to just suddenly become impatient and thoughtless. Be thoughtful, but don't wait.
I like that because you're right that that mind chatter and the anxiety it inevitably entails that comes from the waiting, that comes from the avoidance.
Yeah.
Oh my God, you're absolutely right. And kudos to you and amazing that you're a survivor by all means. Incredible story. And thank you for sharing that. Super appreciative of you sharing that with our listeners. But from a work context, I think about the times that maybe something had went wrong with a colleague during an interaction during a meeting, and then I was in my office waiting to have that conversation, thinking, is it worth the relationship, is it going to be well received, and then suddenly I've already scripted the ways it would be received. And then suddenly I'm already getting armed and ready to go to battle because I've already decided that it's not going to be well received. And so I enter that entire conversation by the time I finally have it from the complete wrong angle. So I
And
love that you have highlighted the cost of waiting.
yeah.
It's a means of incentivizing people to just ask.
And there's a physical component to waiting if you are stressing yourself out. And I think I want to say this correctly. I think we've normalized anxiety to a point where people don't realize how much power they have in at least helping themselves discern how to be their own advocate. It depends on the anxiety that is being created. If it's a fear, I get that we all have fears, but if it's self-induced because of stress or thinking or ruminating or just waiting, we have more power than we give ourselves credit for. Our brain is an amazing hard drive to the individual computer system that's amazing mechanics that it is. And we have the power and permission to reprogram our hard drive anytime we really choose to. But we develop bad habits too. And so we almost have to know what to do instead. Now, this is asking questions I'm not going to be naive and say it's an answer to all anxiety. It's not. We all have different forms of anxiety for different reasons.
Absolutely.
But when it comes to work, and like you just gave the example, I sit in my office, I'm ruminating, I'm fearful, and I'm like, but have you stopped thinking that the other person is a normal person who got up today to be successful? And there may have been a misunderstanding that you have no idea. It has probably nothing to do with you. Let's assume it has nothing to do. Let's go investigate.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have a tendency to be self-centered beings. It's just how we survive. The moment we take our thinking from inside to being curious outside, it automatically reduces some of the anxiety because our curiosity on the outside needs energy and attention that has to take away from the internal thinking. It's changing the direction of the energy, which helps our brains.
And it's about reclaiming power that you forgot you had as well. I'm thinking of a very mundane example, I guess, because my son's in university and he tends to overthink things, but often it's rooted in, well, why don't you investigate this a bit more? And I tell him, for example, he was in residency year 1, year 2, we had to find an apartment. And he's like, I don't even know where to start. And I'm like, you know what? The beauty is there must be a place you can ask. So first step is to find out who could you ask? And then let's work on the ask itself, right? Let's figure out how to have that conversation with them. And for him, the minute that we figured out where, he went from having these like panic crazy calls of, Mom, all the apartments are going to be rented and I'm not going to have a place.
I'm homeless.
I'm like he was homeless already. He was already there living in a box, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, how about we dial this down a bit and make a plan and set that plan in motion. And the minute you set that plan in motion, you suddenly feel like you've gained some level of control and power over the situation. And that in and of itself will ease a lot of the angst related to some of that inertia or just not moving and waiting. Like it's crazy how it can feed and fuel a number of serious mental health and physical ailments, not counting all the tension within the office and the conflict. When I mediate, I'm a mediator, and we teach these workshops on conflict management in the workplace. And more often than not, mediation, when I'll mediate between two people, and they could have saved a lot of money if they just taught their employees and team members conversation and how to ask and how to not run under negative assumptions that the other person wanted, had ill will and wanted to be condescending towards you. Right. One key question I teach, and which is game changing, is help me understand your perspective. You seem to be seeing this from a different angle. Help me understand your perspective.
Which is sharing that perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Right. And that can be game changing. And when you start to ask the questions in the mediation, and then you see these light bulbs go on, like, oh, we could have had this conversation. Did we really need to have, the mediator here to have this conversation? And suddenly the next time they have that conflict, well, they're well equipped. So for our listeners, to kind of wrap this all up, I want to say that you need to make sure that you are providing the tools, the training, and you're creating the environment that not only encourages and supports conversations, communication, and the flow of feedback, but facilitates it. Encourage productive debate in your meetings. And so people start to get comfortable with how to have those conversations respectfully, thoughtfully, and teach them this beautiful framework as a means of equipping them and setting them up for success in that next conversation. Carole, we are at our time, but I do want to ask if there was one nugget of wisdom, one tip or strategy that you really want to make sure we impart on our listeners, what would that be?
Well, sometimes you don't know what to ask. So if you are feeling any type of negative emotion, anger, anxiety, all of the things on one umbrella, ask yourself, what is frustrating me the most? And when you know what's frustrating you the most, you'll know exactly who to ask and what to ask. And sometimes we just need that clarity and that self-care of what's really frustrating me the most. Do I feel invisible? Do I feel not valued? Whatever it is, find that answer. You'll know what to ask and who to ask. And here's a framework that you can do it.
I love it. I love it. And just as a reminder, the framework is assign the right context for the communication, for the conversation. Sorry, that A is for assign the right context. The S is for specify the thing you want to know, the one thing you want to know, because saying that one thing will help that listener really hone in on what's the most important thing they think you need to know based on that very kind of tailored question. And the K is know that other people have perspective from their positions and be curious about understanding that perspective. The exclamation mark is for these beautiful, beautiful questions to add that what and how in order for you to be able to know where to go with it. Did I capture the ask?
Brilliantly.
Perfect. And finally, always remember that you have permission. Give yourself permission and power to stop the conversation once you've gone beyond, and to set that boundary once you've gone beyond that one ask if it's too much. If you're good with continuing with the subsequent one, absolutely, but know that you have permission and power to stop a conversation. I add with the caveat of committing to continuing it down the line. So not to stop it altogether, but to pause it and to give ourselves time to crystallize, reflect, and digest what has just transpired. So thank you, Carole, for this incredible conversation. If people want to continue connecting with you, where can they connect with you?
I love connecting on LinkedIn. It's Carole, Carole, Stizza, Stizza. But find me on LinkedIn. I have a website called relevant-insight.com, and you can visit me there and see the other programs I offer. And I have a book called The Ask Framework on Amazon, and it's coming out on audio sometime in September. So lots of things happening just like you. And I hope that we've done something helpful.
Amazing, amazing. So we will have all of those contacts and all that information in the show notes, folks. That's it for us today. I like to close our sessions and our episodes with, I want you to walk away with one thing. If you reflect on this entire conversation, and I want you to jot down one thing similar to the ask framework, one thing that you heard today that would provide you a strategy that you could set into action today. Land on that one thing, commit to actually taking action on it. Thanks for listening, folks. Well, folks, thanks for joining us for yet another enriching conversation. To hear more about today's guests, make sure to check out the links in the description of this episode. Want to continue the conversation? Then head on over to our social media platforms, all of which are also linked in the description, to keep it going. Finally, don't forget to subscribe to make sure you don't miss another valuable episode.